Welcome to Prism Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 60 of ASP.NET Grid View tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss about the similarities and differences between grid view and repeater controls and when to use grid view control over repeater and vice versa. Let's first understand the similarities with an example. Let's flip to Visual Studio. The first thing I want to do here is create an HTML table. Just to speed things up, I have some HTML already typed, so let me copy and paste that within this web form, and then we'll go over that. So all we have here is a table with one table row which has got two TDs in that. In the first TD, I'm going to have a grid view control, so let's drag and drop a grid view control. And then in the second TD, I'm going to have a repeater control. So let's drag and drop a repeater control. Alright, now within the code behind file, what I basically want to do is write some ADO.NET code to retrieve data from this table TBL employee and then display that within the grid view and repeater controls. Okay, and again we have discussed about ADO.NET in detail in ADO.NET video series, so please watch those videos first if you're new to ADO.NET. So let me copy this method which is going to connect to this database table, retrieve the data and return that data in the form of a data set. So let me paste this method here. So if you look at this method is returning a data set. So what we are doing here, using the configuration manager class, we are reading the connection string from web.config file, and then using that connection string we are building our SQL connection object. And notice the SQL command select star from TBL employee. So we are creating our SQL data adapter object with this command, and then we are creating a new data set, filling that data set with the data by invoking the fill method, which will automatically execute this command as well. And then once we have the data set filled with data, we are returning that data set back because the return type of this method is data set. Okay, so within the page load event, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a data set object. So data set ds is equal to, and I'm going to call this method get data, which is going to return the data set. And then what I'm going to do here, so we have a grid view control and a repeater control on this web form. So grid view 1.data source is equal to that data set, and then I'm going to invoke the data bind method as well. Okay, similarly, let me actually copy those two lines, and then instead of grid view 1, I'm going to specify repeater 1. So repeater 1.data source is equal to that same data set, and then I'm going to invoke the data bind method on that repeater. Alright, so let's save everything. With this code in place, let's go ahead and run. So on this web form, we have a grid view control and a repeater control. We are retrieving data from the table TBL employee, and we are trying to display that within a grid view control and a repeater. Notice this, I have this grid view control rendered, but look at the repeater control, I don't have the repeater control rendered at all. So let me right click on this page and let's say view page source. And if you look at the page source, look at that in the first TD, the data is rendered, and this data is rendered using the grid view control. And look at this, the grid view control has rendered an HTML table here. But look at the second TD, it's empty. The repeater control didn't render any data at all. And if you look at the code, we are using the same data set as the data source for the grid view control and for the repeater control. Okay, and look at this, the way we are binding data to a grid view control and a repeater control, it's exactly similar. Okay, so now let's go back and look at the similarities. So just like a grid view control, a repeater is also a data bound control. You do this data binding in a similar fashion. And to bind data, we use data source property and invoke data bind method, very similar to a grid view control. And the following three events are supported by both the controls. So if you look at grid view is a much richer control. So let's go to the design, and then if I select grid view, and then if I go to the properties, and then I click on this events icon, look at this, grid view control supports a lot of events, but whereas if I pin this properties window there, and then I select the repeater, look at this, I don't have too many events here. Okay, but the common events between grid view control and repeater are these three: item command, item created, and item data bound. Repeater control has them, as well as your grid view control has them. Okay, so obviously these are the three similarities. Just like grid view, a repeater is also a data bound control. To bind data, we use data source property and invoke data bind method, and the following are the three events that are supported by both the controls. Now let's look at the differences. Okay, so by default a repeater control will not render anything if templates are not specified, and we have just seen that. Look at this. When we ran this web form, we have data for the grid view control, but for repeater control I don't have any data displayed. Okay, because when you use a repeater control you have to define templates, okay, where you specify how you want the data to be rendered. Unless and until you specify that, by default the repeater control will not render any data. But that's not the case with grid view control. By default a grid view control will render its data in a tabular format. Okay, so that's the first difference. By default a repeater control will not render anything if templates are not specified, but whereas with the grid view control the data from the underlying data source will be rendered in a default tabular format. Alright, so grid view is more suitable and designed for displaying data in a tabular format, whereas a repeater is used when you want to have complete control on how you want the data to be rendered. For example, let's say this is our TBL employee table from the database, and if you look at it, it has got like 5 columns: employee ID, name, gender, city, and photo path. Now obviously at this path, I have some photos, Mark photo, John, Mary, and Mike's photo. So what I want to do is I want to display those photos something like this on the right hand side. Look at this. I want the output like this. I want the photo, the employee photo, and then their ID, name, gender, and city should be displayed on the right hand side. Okay, so if I want to do something like this, then probably I can make use of a repeater control, because by default grid view control renders data in a tabular format, something like this. Okay, but here, though it is in a tabular format, look at this. These columns, employee ID, name, gender, and city, all of them are displayed as rows in this first in the second column. In the first column, I have the employee photo. So if I want something like this, I can make use of repeater control. Now let's see how to actually achieve the output that you see on the slide with the help of a repeater control. Okay, so obviously the first thing to do is I want to define a table which is going to have 2 cells. Okay, the first cell should contain a photo and the second cell should contain ID, name, gender, and city. So first let's go ahead and add a table. So first of all, your repeater control, look at this. Between the opening and closing tags of the repeater, if I open the angular bracket, look at this, you need to define your templates. Okay, so let me go ahead and select an item template, and then within this item template, first we need to create a table. So first let me go ahead and create this table with the 2 TDs. So what I'm doing here, let me copy this and then we'll format this properly. And then look at this. So within the repeater we defined an item template, and then I have a table here, an HTML table. I have set a border of 1 pixel solid, and the color is this one, and the background color is this one. Okay, and then if you look at the table, it has got 1 TR with 2 TDs. The first TD has got an image element. Okay, so I have used an ASP.NET image control here, and then obviously I have specified an image URL. Look at this. I'm saying bind this image URL property with photo path column from this TBL employee table. So these are the data binding expressions that we have been, the same data binding expressions that we use with the grid view control. So we are binding the image URL property with the photo path column from this TBL employee table. Okay, so that this TD within the first row should display the employee photo. Okay, and then the second TD should display ID, name, gender, and city columns. So what I'm going to do here is within the second TD, so here within the second TD, I'm going to create another table, obviously with 1, 2, 3, and 4 rows. So I'm going to create another table with 4 rows to display ID, name, gender, and city. And again, to speed things up, I have that HTML already typed. So this is straightforward HTML. A table contains a table row, and a table row contains a TD. So let me copy and paste that HTML here, and then let's format that by pressing Ctrl K and D after we select the entire HTML. And now look at this. So here within the second TD, I added another table, and then look at this. I have a TR here, and within that tr I have two tds. Okay, why do I need two tds? One td to display the id, the column name, and the other td to display the column value. So here I have the hard-coded text id, that's in bold tag, and then in the next td I have a label control, and then I'm binding the text property of that label control with the employee id column. Okay, so similarly I'm doing it for name, gender, and then city. So it's as simple as that. So now if I flip this web form to the design, look at this. At the moment, if you look at the grid view control, we didn't define any templates there. By default, the grid view has this auto generate column set to true. Depending on whatever data we have in the underlying data set, it's going to generate the rows and columns for us automatically. And the data will be rendered in a default tabular format that you can see here. Okay, but for a repeater we have to define how we want the data to be rendered using a template. Okay, and that's what we are doing here. So at this point, if I flip the web form to the design mode, look at my repeater control. It has got that design. So here on the left, I have an image control, and then on the right you can see ID, name, gender, and city. Now with these changes, let me go ahead and run this and see if it's gonna work. Okay, so here I can see ID, name, gender, city. Okay, but then I don't see the photo. Why is that? Because look at what we are binding the photo path property. We are binding this image to the photo path property, and look at this. What do I have here? I have the image element, and we are saying image URL is equal to whatever is the value that is present in photo path. So photo path has this path, images/mark.png. So at that location you need to have those photos. So let's flip to our Visual Studio. Let's add a folder to this project, and let's call that images. And then let me copy and paste the required images. So I have these images on my hard disk. So Mark photo, Mike photo, John, Mary, all the photos I have here. And then I also have a 1 by 1 pixel image here. So if you look at this first image that I have highlighted, it's a 1 by 1 pixel image. It's a white image. Now why am I using this image? Anywhere if I want a space of 1 by 1 pixel, then I can use this image. In a bit we'll see how we are going to make use of this image. So let me copy these photos, and then let's flip to Visual Studio. Let's paste them into this images folder. So we have all the required images there. So let's go ahead and run our application. Now since the images are present in the folder, they should be rendered within the repeater control. Look at that. I get the output as I expected. Now everything is fine, but if you look at between the first row and second row, there is no space at all. Okay, the borders of the first row and second row, they're like joined together, and it is a little bit bold. I don't want that. I want a separation between both of these rows. So how can I achieve that? Within the repeater control, we have just used an item template. Okay, now between each item, that is between each row within the repeater control, I want to separate them, and to do that you can make use of a separator template. So I have a separator template here, and then here what I'm going to do, I just want a 1 by 1 pixel space between the first row and the second row. Now if you look at the rows themselves, how are they displayed? They are displayed using this table elements. Okay, so between each row which is being displayed using a table, so technically this is a table. The first row is a table, second row is a table, third row is a table. So I want space between these two tables, and to do that I'm going to make use of a separator template. And here all I'm going to do is I'm going to use an image control. So let's drag and drop another image control, and then I'm going to set the image URL property. Scroll down and then click on that pick URL button. So you know that within the Solution Explorer we have this images folder, and from that I'm going to pick up this 1 by 1 pixel image. Okay, I'm going to click OK. So now if I flip this web form to the design mode, look at that, I got some space now there. Okay, so let me run this now and see, if we get that 1 by 1 pixel space. Look at that. I'm not sure if you can see that in the video, but there is a space between each item of the repeater. Okay, so now if I want a flexible layout like this, not the default tabular layout, then probably repeater is my choice. Okay, now, but does that mean I can't do the same thing using a grid view control? No. Now, if you remember, we discussed about grid view control. Grid view control has got different types of columns, like bound field, the template field, etc. So you can make use of the template field, and within the template field, you can define your custom, templates, and then possibly we can achieve the same thing even with grid view control as well. And to do that, what I need to basically do is, so here within the grid view control at the moment, by default auto generate columns is true, meaning what it's going to do for all the columns and rows that we have within the grid view control, basically it's going to auto generate columns for us, which means it's going to render everything that's present in the data set within the grid view control. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to set auto generate columns is equal to false for now, and then I'm going to specify what columns and how I want them to be displayed using these columns here. And then instead of using the bound fields, I'm going to use a template field. Now when we use a template field, then we can specify how we want the grid view control to render using templates. So obviously again I have item template here. Okay, so all I need to do here now is copy and paste this HTML there. So within the item template, whatever HTML you have, so I'm going to copy this and paste this within the item template of our grid view control, and let's see if it's going to display similar to that of a repeater. So I copied that exact same HTML that's present within the item template of the repeater, and I'm going to paste that within the grid view. Okay, so let's save it. Now let's flip the web form to the design mode. Look at that, the grid view control is also very similar now. Okay, now let me go ahead and run this. So the output should be similar. Look at that, I have a similar output, but then the grid view has got some lines here. First of all, the top one is the header. So I don't want the header to be shown in the grid view control. So what I'm going to do here is select the grid view control, go to the properties, and then there is a property called show header. So I'm going to set that to false. Okay, so that should get rid of the header. Now let's run this, and then on top we should not have those blank lines. That's fine, but then look at this, there is one more border surrounding the data that's displayed. So to get that border out, grid view has got this grid lines, show grid lines property. Or it's called grid lines now, which is both by default here. I'm going to set that to none. Now let's run this and see if the output between the repeater and the grid view controller are exactly the same. Look at that, they're absolutely similar. So I can say that whatever you can achieve with a repeater control, you can also achieve that using grid view control, using template fields. Okay, but then grid view is a richer control. You can also use it, for example, if you want paging, sorting, editing capabilities, then grid view should be preferred over repeater control. Repeater is a very lightweight control. Alright, now let's go back to our slide. So by default, the repeater control does not offer editing, paging, and sorting capabilities, but whereas a grid view control does. However, with a bit of effort and code, it is possible to implement these features using a repeater control as well. Remember, whatever we can do with the grid view control, we can also do with repeater control, but it requires a little bit of effort and programming. Okay, but out of the box, grid view control offers these features, editing, paging, and sorting, but repeater doesn't. Okay, so I mean, both of the controls we can achieve exactly the same things, but with one you may require more effort and custom code to do it, but with the other you don't have to. Okay, so obviously if you want to have complete control on what is rendered, then repeater should be your choice. Obviously, again, keep in mind repeater doesn't support these capabilities, editing, paging, and sorting out of the box. So obviously, when to use grid view control over repeater and vice versa, the answer is very simple. A repeater is very lightweight control, and if you want to have the complete control over how the data is rendered, and if you don't want these capabilities of editing, paging, and sorting, then repeater should be your choice. On the other hand, if you want the data to be displayed in a default tabular format, and you also need editing, paging, and sorting capabilities, then grid view should be your choice. Alright, on this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.